now. So thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Geneva Blackmer. I am the program director for the Interfaith Center located at the Miami University campus in Oxford, Ohio. And our mission is to invite people of diverse religious, spiritual, and secular worldviews to participate in one another's practices in order to cultivate appreciative understanding and to build friendships and relationships, as well as to unify them around common moral, social, and ethical concerns. And this program is co-sponsored by the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council, whose mission is to build the most welcoming community for all people. The council is comprised of more than 22 different faith directors, and its board and volunteers provide educational programming throughout the year in order to break down and prevent stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. And this program in particular has been designed to share information about different faiths in order to address common misconceptions that people have about people from different faith traditions in order to hopefully eradicate some xenophobia and violence towards people of different faiths and cultures. So we're really glad to have all of you here with us today. And I'm really excited to welcome Katie Breslin, who is our speaker tonight. Katie is a Quaker writer and advocate for peace and justice issues. Katie writes about issues related to religion, culture, and technology. She is currently a seminary student at Earlham School of Religion, where she is studying Quaker ministry. Before coming to seminary, Katie worked in a faith-based advocacy at the Friends Committee on National Legislation and Catholics for Choice. At FCNL, Katie led the work of engaging young people to lobby Congress on peace and justice issues. She currently lives in Richmond, Indiana with her cat, Jada. And so I'm gonna hand it over to you, Katie.
Thank you so much, Eva, and thank you for putting on this awesome programming. It's been fun to see all these denominations get the chance to do their pitch and talk a little bit about our faith, which is really exciting. So I'd love to tell you a little bit about my story. I'm not a birthright friend or a friend, a Quaker who was raised Quaker. But first, for those of you that I could see your faces, how many of you have heard of Quakers before, or like how many of you are familiar with the Religious Society of Friends? Any Quakers on the line? Okay, a little bit. We got some there. Hello. Hey. So I started my journey with the Religious Society of Friends, or the Quakers, which we're also known as, when I started working for the Friends Committee on National Legislation, which is a national peace and justice lobby. I'm a former Catholic, and I was working in pro-choice issues. And I started working for FCNL, and I was feeling, very spiritually tired. I felt like I'd spent a lot of my life just working, being in a denomination that was great and really filling, but I was looking for more a religion that had a little bit more of a liberal or progressive stances on issues like women's reproductive rights and on LGBTQ equality. And so when I started working for the Friends, I was really excited to learn a lot about the history of Quakers. I started to, as an extrovert, I was someone who really was very bad at sitting in silence, which is a really critical part of being Quaker, is the ability to do like contemplative prayer. I was very bad at that in the beginning. But as time went on, I started to really appreciate, the 5 minutes of silence in the beginning of a meeting. And as I traveled among friends, Quakers across the country in my job doing young adult outreach, I learned more and more about the Quaker story, and I really started to fall in love with the religion. So that's kind of where I came into the Religious Society of Friends. And I liked them so much that I decided to move away from my home of Washington, D.C. to Richmond, Indiana, where we have one of the largest Quaker communities in the United States. Right here in Indiana, which is great. So I've been here for about almost 2 years. I'm a seminary student working on Quaker ministry. But for today, I'm going to talk a little bit about our founding. I'll talk a little bit about our practice, our beliefs, our defining characteristics, a few other things, and we'll take it from there. And I heard that you all are great at discussion, so I'm excited to hear your questions and hear your experiences. First misconception, since this is a talk about common misconceptions, we are not the Oats. We're not, and we really appreciate the Amish and the Mennonite, but it is a different denomination. Oftentimes we get mistaken for those, which is great that they exist, but we're a totally different denomination. And like I said, our relationship to the oaths is complicated, and we are definitely not profiting off of it. And we do not look like the Quaker Oats guy. There are some friends that have decided to take plain dress or simplify their wardrobes, but that's not the majority of us. In fact, some of us are very fond of lipstick and eyeliner. So it is a common misconception that we received that Quakers are plain and, nice and neat, but it is just, it was a marketing tool a long time ago for people to see the good of Quakers, and that's kind of stuck since then. So Quakers were a pulled together group of seekers that were founded around 1647. They were split off from the Church of England. And at the time, there was a huge amount of spiritual upheaval, political unrest, and a lot of people were questioning institutions and trying to find a way to find God again. And so Quakers were one of the groups that were founded during this time period. We often consider George Fox to be one of the main founders of Quakerism. He had a vision on Pendle Hill. This is a religion that's predominantly was started in England, and he and other disciples created a group of 60 valiant missionaries to go off and talk about having a direct connection to Jesus and having a correct connection to God. At the time, the religion was very Christocentered, and that was really important to these early friends. With common folk was to show that people can be religious, and they don't need priests, that every person could be a priest in their own right. So that was a little bit more about that founding. And so, like I said, it left the Church of England. They were not very well liked when they started, and as their movement grew, they received some pushback from the English government. So Quakers were thrown into jail. George Fox was married to a woman named Margaret Fell, who spent even more years in jail. They were put in jail for women preaching in their churches. They were put in jail because, of their religious practices of sitting in silence. And it caused a lot of problems. Quakers weren't allowed to have certain careers. They weren't allowed to go into education. And Quakers would say that they didn't want to go into education, but they were completely restricted from those opportunities. And so Quakers had to find their own way of building lives for themselves amongst these restrictions. And so many of them came to the United States to seek religious freedom. Some of them stayed in England and they became chocolate makers. So Cadbury is one of our chocolate makers that come from our denomination. And they've been involved with different peace and justice issues since the beginning. So that was something that was really important to our founders and continues to be important to us as friends today. So a little bit about our practice. In the beginning, it was 3-hour church services, meeting services is what we call them, in silence, where people would give long messages. Quakers believe that we have a direct connection to God, and so you could directly hear God and then speak the words of God in a worshipful setting. It's really incredibly powerful. And, as the time went on, the services got a little shorter. The meeting for worship, which is what we call it, has gotten shorter. So it's about usually an hour. And there's been different interpretations of that worship based off of the influences of different denominations on Quakerism. So, for instance, I originally came from what we call the unprogrammed tradition, which is an hour of silence with people giving messages as they feel led. Now I live in Richmond, Indiana. This is home to what we call program friends. So there's usually a prepared message and then some silent worship afterwards. I was very surprised when the meeting here started to sing. I had never heard singing in a meeting house, but I was really grateful to hear it. So there is some change in the ways that practice exists among friends, but that silence is still core for what our practice looks like today. So sitting in silence, listening to God, more than 5 minutes in a meeting, it's really become an important part of many of our lives. And so I try to do that in the morning too, because continuous practice helps us center more on those Sundays when we really need it. And so a little bit about our beliefs. We have testimonies, which is basically our interpretation of how our faith helps us live out our lives. Some of them have been characterized as a group called the Spices. It's a simplified version. So simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, and stewardship. These are generally how we hope that our lives will reflect based off the values that we share. And we believe very deeply that there's that of God in each person. So that is why many of us are pacifists or have really strong love for the peace testimony. And Quakers have been historically, especially since the 1900s to now, very politically active. The American Friends Service Committee, which is an arm of the Quaker, it's not like part of our Quaker structure because we're non-hierarchical, but a group of Quakers started a service committee to create alternative service for World War II for people that were conscientious objecting. So that was one way that we were trying to be involved, show that we're committed to humanitarian aid, but we didn't feel, many of them did not feel called to be part of war. So that's, again, a little bit about our denomination and our work on anti-war movements. We've also been very involved with anti-nuclear, in nuclear disarmament. We've been involved with anti-death penalty. So different Quakers have been involved with these actions throughout our time period. And the organization I work for was started in 1947 by some Quakers who were recognizing that we needed to be involved with government affairs as well as we were doing this work. And that's why the Friends Committee on National Legislation was started. And it is still completely Quaker governed today, which is exciting for those of us that weren't Quaker and now are. So Quakers today, what are they like? We are a very small denomination. We're over 300, there's over 300,000 Quakers in the world today, and 49% of them actually live in the continent of Africa. So, even though in the United States, Quakerism is definitely a predominantly white religion, it is important to note that the majority of Friends are Friends of African descent. Which is, a really exciting piece for us. Most of the Friends that live in the continent of Africa live in Kenya, and they primarily practice a more programmed, centered worship space. So they have messages, often have a lot of singing, and they communicate with us. There's, like I said, no hierarchy, but there are some branches within Quakerism that sometimes unite the Friends in Africa and the Friends in the United States, which is really exciting. And of course, the Friends in England, and there still continues to be Quakers all over the world. Quakers, our meetings, we are structured around a meeting. So, your town might have a Quaker meeting, probably just one, unless you live in Richmond, and then you might have three, but that's if you're, Quaker rich in your region. But usually there's just one meeting within a few miles, and the meetings are typically anywhere from 4 people gathered in a basement to 100 people gathered in a church. So it can really range in denominations. Some people, like I said, in programs, services, those meetings actually have a pastor. So as a now program friend, that could be my path after seminary. We'll see. And as an unprogrammed friend, there isn't a pastor, but oftentimes there are like administrative workers who do a lot of work for the meeting that are really meaningful, and also have a lot of work to do with different social justice movements and ministry related jobs. Oftentimes they can be chaplains or be involved in different related fields of ministry, and utilizing the Quaker values of listening, Quaker values of that of God in each person. That's a little bit about what Quakers are today. So I hope I've finish any type of misconceptions about Quakerism, or giving you some interesting information. But I'd love to open it up if there are any questions. I'm happy to. I can talk all night about Quakers. It's truly been one of my favorite parts of my life, a very enriching part of my life. But I definitely want this to be more of a conversation.
Thanks so much, Katie. So if anyone has a question or a comment, feel free to unmute yourself, or you're welcome to type it in the chat if you're more comfortable doing it that way.
I could ask, it would be interesting to hear more about what you did when you were working with FCNL.
Yeah, so we started in 2015. There was a push with the Capital campaign to start young adult programming, so additional funding for specifically encouraging young people, college age young people, to do more lobbying work. So I was part of the first class of, I was the manager of the first class of a program called the Advocacy Corps, which was a 9-month-long program where organizers were paid to do lobbying work in their home districts. And it was so much fun. I loved working for FCNL. It was like, when I left, I was in tears because it was just so much fun. It was not fun to be doing that, if I can be not partisan, but just real. Like during the Trump administration was a little rough. A lot of the issues that we worked on were issues that were, up for attack under that administration. But I got to work on issues like immigration reform, climate change, and I got to work with young people from all over the country, oftentimes meeting for the first time. And lobbying for the first time. And I was also in charge of our spring lobby weekend, which is a 3-day-long weekend in Washington, D.C., specifically for young people. And it was just so much fun. We would teach young people how to lobby, and they would start in the morning being very nervous, and then by the end of the day they'd be like so excited. They're like, I told my member of Congress that they should support climate change. I'm like, yes, you did. So I really appreciated working there. And then, of course, like as I just realized it was time for me to move on. But thankfully, FCNL hired my protege. So it's currently run by an incredible woman named Larissa Gill. She's, doing amazing things for that program. And I think that they're rocking and rolling. But FCNL is a great organization. If you haven't heard of them and you want to lobby, I would highly recommend going on their website. I see some here on the questions. Oh.
Yeah, there are a few in the chat. The first one is from Matt. Are there any creeds or statements of faith that Quakers adhere to?
Ooh, already starting with the controversial questions, Matt. The answer is yes and no. I can say, a lot of unprogrammed friends would say that there isn't a creed. It is really led, that we recognize that there are historic trends among friends, and that each Quaker yearly meeting, which is, there's a monthly meeting, which is the regular meetings at, the churches or the worship spaces. And then there's kind of like a gathering of meetings. And oftentimes those yearly meetings have what's called a faith and practice. So sometimes those will have more, community oriented value statements. But meetings can have different relationships with that faith and practice. And sometimes if the faith and practice doesn't work for the meeting, they might choose a different yearly meeting, which, happens. If you're a program friend, there have been documents throughout our time which try to create more of a statement of faith, as you mentioned. So it's a little bit different. It depends on where you are in Quaker world. But there are some. It's just a lot of it has to do with how our communities interpret God, especially in that time. We also believe in something called continuing revelation, which is the ability to listen to the ways that God is moving in a space. That has led some friends to no longer see the Bible as their religious authoritative measure. And so it really depends on where you're seeing God show up for you, which is, I think, really exciting for a religion that can continue to grow and learn about the world around us and to see God in that space. So that's cool. All right. Got a few more questions. Yay.
Yes, the first one's from Jennifer. Is the birth of the Quaker Church movement part of any evangelical awakening of that era?
Oh yeah. Oh yes, you've got a historian under here. Yeah, it was definitely part of that group. There were a few of them that kind of all hung out together. Those evangelical oriented groups, and that's what that Valiant 60, that group of missionaries that started off. Some of them went to the United States, and some of them stayed in England. And their goal really was to share with people this radical idea that they didn't need a priest in order to meet in a worshipful space, that women could speak in church. Like these were some of these radical ideas that no one had, that not no one had ever thought about, but that, a lot of people didn't have access to. And their goal was to make worship more accessible for more people. And part of that was creating that relationship between corporate bodies, people gathering together, and the divine. But yes, it is, we think, of evangelicals, and there still are evangelical friends today that do this type of work. And, we're grateful to be part of that, that explosion of, of energy in the 1600s.
Like the next question is from V. Jackson. Is baptism or communion incorporated within Quakerism?
Another controversial one. Well, mostly, so I would say yes and no. I would say primarily no, that baptism and communion are not part of most, at least in my context, which is the United States. There are some yearly meetings, some Quaker churches that have decided to bring baptism and communion into Quaker spaces. But early friends believe that we became baptized and we lost our original sin when Jesus died for us. That was like their theology on this, that they believe that we are entering into, and going back to the earlier question, the reason why there's such evangelical energy happening in that time period is because a lot of early friends were apocalyptic. They thought that like the end of the world was happening and they wanted to be on the right side of it. And so a lot of these early, these churches that were happening during this time period were coming out with radical ideas because they truly thought that the world was ending. There was just so much political upheaving. And so that's why Quakers were like, we feel like, we have been baptized. We don't need to incorporate communion into our religious service. We just need to be together and to listen to God. I think we're just still waiting for the world to end because we're still meeting and we're still waiting for God. So, but God shows up in lots of different ways. And I think we're trying to learn to navigate that as that comes.
The next question is from Susan. Many faiths are having difficulties with aging out. In other words, many of their members are in their senior years and young people have not become very involved. Is this a problem for Quakers internationally, or are many young people involved?
Oh yeah, it's definitely a problem. We are, and I think that's why FCNL did this work on young adult outreach, because they recognized that they needed to find a way to speak to young people. And a lot of the studies on millennials and Gen Z shows that we're a very politically active generation, and that this political activism was actually a good way to introduce faith. It wasn't the goal of FCNL, but it was, of course, part of it is that we wanted to incorporate more young people's voices into this conversation around public policy and religion. And so, I think that there are a lot of young people who have been, I was someone who was brought up in a church and then kind of it didn't fit me when I started to grow up. So I'm hopeful that Quakers can close the gap, but it's going to be hard. We are very much an aging denomination. But there are, some really exciting young people who have been getting involved in the Religious Society of Friends. So I have hope that it'll continue. That is my prayer. I hope that there's a religion I can retire into, and that I'm continuing to talk about more young people coming into the religion. That is my goal. But I hope that, yeah. And there are like different pieces of Religious Society of Friends. I know that there's been a lot of training that's been available for young people, for young Quakers. And I think that that's, if you're really worried about, aging out in any religion, I did this work with young people. I would say like offering training is just like such a great way to bring people in. And when I worked at FCNL, they offered clerking training. So Quakers, we have a meeting for business. which, we have like a business meeting style of just making decisions, because we often make decisions based off of a sense of the meeting. The secular term is similar to consensus, but that was really important to me to be able to learn how to do clerking, because that meant that I was able to take on more leadership roles within the Religious Society of Friends. And if I hadn't gotten that clerking training, I probably wouldn't have gone to seminary, and I probably wouldn't be on this call. So I think that offering that training to young people and showing them how we can do our faith it is so important. And I'm grateful for every time a Quaker has been like, you should sign up for this webinar. Like, yes, I will sign up for that webinar.
Thanks, Kitty. Okay, another maybe more difficult question. Can you share some insight as to how Quakers played a part in Black history during slave times?
Absolutely. It's kind of a plus and minus. There is a lot of Quakers who were involved with abolition, and specifically here in my region. Levi Coffin, he was a Quaker who you can visit his house here in Richmond, Indiana, if you come visit. And he was really involved with the Underground Railroad. Many Quakers were involved with the Underground Railroad. Quakers as a denomination came to consensus around finding slavery immoral pretty earlier than a lot of other denominations. But that doesn't take away from some of the ways that Quakers, even though that there were yearly meetings that were against slavery, there were Quaker slaveholders. There were Quakers who fell on the opposite side of the Civil War, and there were definitely Quakers who didn't believe that people of African descent should be able to have the same rights as other people, and I think that that's actually something that we're still struggling with today. I said we're a predominantly white religion here in the United States, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we are trying desperately to take diversity, equity, inclusion seriously, and to see like what it means to be a predominantly white religion and try to be an ally with like the Black Lives Matter movement. So there's been some really great, history of Quakers being involved with abolition. By Bayard Rustin, who was the architect for the March on Washington, was a Quaker, a Black Quaker, who was also gay. And he's an incredible symbol. There have been Black friends who have just really, helped push the needle on social change. But we definitely, as a denomination, have a long way to go in terms of rectifying the ways that Quakers have also been part of privilege and receiving of white privilege in our nation, and have kind of and sometimes stood aside when we really should have been fighting for justice. So it's complicated, but it is good to know that there are some good parts of our religion that's doing good work.
The next question is from Susan. Is there a belief in life after death? And if so, what does it look like?
I get this question often, and I always stumble on it. So I'm going to stumble on it in this call. I think that, for me, whenever I've studied theology on afterlife, it really depends on the meeting and the culture of the meeting. I personally believe that that there is an afterlife. Many friends do not. The way it looks is also different, and it is just really it really depends on the denomination. There isn't like a single one characteristic that is defined as the afterlife doctrine, which is kind of exciting, right? You get to talk to your friends about all of the ways that you think what will happen after you die. And you can all have different opinions about it. But there's not like one single like place where we can go to that will speak to what we think will happen after death. So it'll be a surprise. How exciting.
Let's see. The next question is from Jennifer. Have African American missionaries come to the USA to plant new churches?
It's funny. There are a few Kenyan churches, like people from Kenya that have come to the United States, but most of them are primarily surrounding immigrant populations from Kenya. There's a church specifically close to Baltimore, Maryland, that's similar to that. The reason why there are Quakers in Kenya is because there was a missionary trip from the United States to Kenya And that's, that kind of started the ball rolling on that side. But I think it'd be kind of fun if we got some Kenyans to come over here and do some reverse missionary work, because, I think we have a lot to learn from our Kenyan friends. I've been really fortunate to be in seminary with quite a few of them who have just like awesome entrepreneurial ideas about how to do ministry. And I think that we would really have a lot to benefit from their knowledge, especially here in the United States. They also have better music than us. So honestly, coming over here, that would be great.
Let's see. Do you know the work of James Terrell and the Rodden Crater in Arizona?
I don't. So Susan, if you want to unmute, I'd be happy to learn.
Okay, so James Terrell was a Quaker, brought up in a Quaker family, and he would go to the meetings, and he became intrigued by light during the meetings. And you can look it up. I was an art appreciation teacher, so you probably don't want to hear the whole story, but I have another story that I can only tell you. Anyway, you can look it up, but I became extremely interested again in Quakers when I read his story and his interest in the light and how that has influenced his artwork as a very famous sculptor, environmental sculptor. He has created this Rodin crater in, I think, southwestern Arizona, and it's all about the experience of light. So it might be interesting. My other story, which I'll share with you, I'm the one who asked the question about the afterlife.
Oh yeah, I love it.
I believe it's true. Okay, so my own faith, I believe it's true because of my experiences. I gave a presentation last week with Geneva, and I'm practicing Sukyo Mahikari, which is from Japan. But I had a small center in a place called Grants Lick, Kentucky, a very small center. And I was a relatively new member at that point, only been a member maybe 4 years. And I had this incredible dream that I drove home from university in my cowgirl pickup, and standing behind the building that the center was in on the top floor was a line of people from another age, like maybe the 1800s. And they were dressed in, there was one man standing in the front. He had a beard, he had on a black suit, and there were many women and maybe some other men in a row. And they were staring at the roof of this building that our center was in. And as I pulled up, I saw that the roof was on fire. And in the dream, I ran over and beat on his chest and said, "Why didn't you put it out? You can see the fire. Why didn't you put it out?" And in a silent voice, he communicated mind to mind to me. And he said, "We're keeping the fire from spreading until you can put it out." Okay?
Oh, wow.
So it gets better. So I went to the Cincinnati Center, which was our bigger center at that time. And there was a full-time staff member there, like a minister. And I asked him, I told him the dream, and I said, "I don't understand what this was about. What should I do?" And he said, "You need to hire," I was like 33 or 4 years old and not well, probably no more obedient than I am now. So, but anyway, he said, "You need to contact an electrician and have them go up in the attic and see if there's any problem." And I said, "You don't understand. I'm a professor. How am I going to say to an electrician, I want you to go into the attic and check and see if there's a problem if I don't have a problem?"
Right.
I can't tell him about the dream, right?
Right.
And he said, "I don't care how you do it. You should do it." So I called the electrician, and he came, and he thought that was wonderful that he could get paid for going into the attic to check for a problem that didn't exist. He came down in only a few minutes, and he said, "I don't understand why you haven't had a fire. I found these loose wires up here that are bare, and they're against insulation material. They should have caused a fire."
Oh my God.
So he repaired them, and it was all fine. And I thought, well, okay, I have no idea who that guy was or who those people were, but it was very interesting. So I went home for Christmas to my mom's house, my grandma's town, And my grandmother had given my mother a book called Edna's Roots. My mom is Edna. So I'm looking through these pictures, and the man who spoke to me is right there in the picture. And it
Oh my
turns
God.
out he is like a great relative. His name was Hoover. And when I asked about him, they said he was a Quaker and that our family had been Quakers in that
Oh my
generation.
God.
So I just thought you might enjoy
Yeah.
that story. And I think you must have some sort of life after death.
That's really cool.
Okay.
Well, I love that. That's really
The
cool.
ancestors were communicating in some way. So
Yeah.
okay.
I'm
So
glad
that's-
I'm glad your house wasn't on fire. But actually, it's interesting that you bring up James. Well, I love that story. First off, I think that that's great, and I think that that's why Quakers believe in continuing revelation, because we believe that we're still learning more information and more experiences, and those types of things are definitely things that inform our faith as we continue to live and grow. And that's part of like deep listening, and that's part of being present, to have those experiences. But when you mentioned James Terrel, I actually just Googled him and I realized he's the one that he actually built a meeting house in Texas, the Live Oak Friends meeting, which I haven't actually visited. I have a lot of friends that are part of the Live Oak Friends community, but haven't gotten to visit yet. But now I will definitely appreciate it a little bit more if I ever get to go to Houston.
He's an amazing artist.
I'm really excited. Well, now I'm going to be on a Wikipedia rabbit hole because of you after this.
Okay, great.
The best thing that can come out of an interfaith dialogue is a further exploration on art, which is great.
There you go.
Thanks to you both. It looks like Marilyn has a question. Do you see Jesus Christ as God or as a prophet or something else?
Yeah, I guess, in terms of like broader friends, I would say that friends have different relationships with Jesus. I personally see Jesus as, an important part of my life. I see him as part of God. I believe in a non-binary God, but I believe that Jesus is part of that. Personally, and I think a lot of Quakers, we've had a lot of struggle within our denomination about how much authority the Bible should have in our faith. I personally found a lot of richness in the Bible. I actually didn't really read the Bible until I came to seminary, which is, I was Catholic, so I would hear the Bible at church. I would watch Veggie Tales or, like lots of like Sunday school, but I hadn't actually read the text. And then when I got to seminary, and I was like, oh, there's some good stuff in here. There's some bad stuff. But, if you look at some of the historical context for a lot of these things, I got to see like a different version of Jesus than I hadn't seen before. And so for me, Jesus is, an incredibly important part of my life because I see Jesus as this incredible anti-empire, radical, awesome person, like who's just like doing the work. But I know that, for other people, Jesus might not show up that way. So yeah, Jesus is definitely, part of God for me, is definitely a prophet in like the way that he lived his life. And I'm really grateful that, I get to be part of a denomination that lets me take in a lot of the beautiful parts of Jesus, and also allows people who have other examples of prophets experience those prophets. It's kind of fun to be in a religious community where we can actually learn from each other's experiences and kind of grow and learn together. So Jesus fan is how I feel.
Looks like another question just came in from Jennifer. Is there a social issue that concerns you especially or personally?
Yeah, there's a few. The issue that has concerned me, that brought me into activism, that made me move to DC, is the issue of immigration, which I think is, one of the biggest human rights issues of our generation. The ways that immigrants in this country have been treated. I was working in DC during, a lot of the children in cages piece of bad news that was happening. And I come from a small town I'm from Scranton originally, a small town outside of Scranton called Hazleton. And in my small town, there was a citywide ordinance that tried to make English the official language of the city, and also tried to enforce immigration laws through their local police departments. It caused a lot of major issues. It caused a lot of racial tension. And especially because it was a region, I come from like Irish and Italian, like coal miners, people who came to this country who were really hoping to make a better life and ended up with a lot of major problems with working conditions and living, in a lot of different poverty situations. And so it's really interesting to see like a community that has come from primarily immigrant roots to then ostracize another community who was also coming in because they're working factory jobs. And so when I went to college, I was really passionate about immigration reform. I'm still incredibly passionate about immigration reform. And some of FCNL's young adults are actually working on immigration reform now. And I think that that is just like such a great issue because there's just so much humanity and, really important values that can go into that type of legislation. And as I grew older, and not only do I care about making sure that that there is citizenship access to people who are here, whether they have papers or not, but I also believe that we need to look at the way that militarization affects our borders, affects our communities. And so that, as a Quaker, that really was something that grew out of this, wanting to see people that of God in each person and making sure that they're okay, but also seeing how militarization can really affect people who live in communities like El Paso or anywhere, even like, it's like 100 miles by airspace from the border. It's an incredible amount of space where these having blockades and constantly being harassed for paperwork. That became something that I cared a lot more about because it had more to do with communities. So it's definitely an issue that is really important.
And if anyone is interested in digging into that issue further, there is actually a interconnected justice workshop this Sunday on immigrant justice, and our student liaison, Priyana Kalita, will be one of the speakers. So I encourage you all to check that out. I'm going to put the link in here.
Awesome.
So Morgan, it looks like you had a comment. I don't know if you want to jump in, or if you had a question to follow with that, or.
Oh no, I just what Katie said reminded me of, and I'm paraphrasing, AOC said something to the effect of, if Jesus were to walk into the halls of Congress in session, they'd kick him out as a radical. And I think that's a lot of good understanding about if this is a God of love, how are we showing it? If you believe in love, if you're going to worship this, how are you showing it? And I just have to think that religion is responsible directly for so many wars and atrocities. And all the religions, every single one has a basic tenet of the golden rule, however they want to phrase it. And most all of them have violated that. Our tribalism has taken over. It's just, Quakerism is really, really beautiful, but I feel like it's been ground under because it's not violent, it's not forceful, it's not imposing. There's none of the worship or be decapitated,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I loved, AOC and the way that she practiced her faith is, truly one of the most inspirational parts of her to me. I think I've read a lot of her pieces, and she's a Catholic. She and I have, very similar social justice roots from our Catholicism. And I think that she's absolutely right that radical love is not always something that is accepted. It's not always something, it's not good public policy sometimes because it costs money or it requires us to really look deep at the problems of our society and to see those issues with compassion and love. And I think about, sometimes I feel like Jesus when I'm like, I'm going to throw some tables, but sometimes I feel like Jesus when I'm like, oh, I have to deeply listen to the issues that are happening and see how I can, listen and hear where we're both coming from and find a way forward. So there's a lot of lessons we can learn from Jesus. And I wish Congress would take on that deep listening piece. That would be nice.
I just so miss Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I just really admire her. And I emulate, I wish I could emulate. She said a couple different ways: stand up for what you believe in, but do so in a way that invites others to join you. That is so hard for me to do. She also said you can disagree without being disagreeable. And that's something I think this society really needs to learn. And I may have lost my RBG, but I am so glad to have my AOC. She's such a clear speaker, a clear thinker, clear boundaries, and absolute diplomacy that we have been missing. We need someone who's not just old, but who's wise, who has open eyes and a warm heart, who's lived, loved, lost, and can deal with reality. I love it. I'm glad she's there. I hope I live long enough to vote for her.
I do too. I think she's awesome, truly. And I think that one of the reasons I like her so much is because of the ways that she shows vulnerability in a way that, is, I think, refreshing from a politician's perspective. But as a person of faith, I think that's where I think when we can shine is when we have communities that people can be vulnerable with one another. And I don't know. Maybe Congress can't be vulnerable with one another. Maybe we should do some things to change that. And that's why the lobbying work FCNL.
Vulnerability takes courage, and you have to be able to have that courage. It really helps to have a little bit of decency on the other side. It's just the reason I married my husband, the number one reason, because the man can feel immensely and still act. And he takes it for granted. He's like, oh, I was just born with that. Yeah, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful. He was a firefighter and he carried out burning babies and burning elderly and rescued people out of burning cars and rescued people from horrendous suicides in front of their children. Most people would have just run screaming. It's horrendous. And yes, it takes a toll on you. People don't realize what a toll our healthcare providers take upon themselves and our vets and these people. But I'm just so glad to have people stand up for the truth and speak it in a palatable, conscientious, diplomatic way. I have been so missing diplomacy and wisdom. So I hope it spreads. But I think your faith there are a lot of beautiful faiths, but you guys have stuck to your tenets really well.
We try very hard, but sometimes it falls flat. Well, it's funny that you mentioned, speaking truth to power it comes from Quaker phrase. I didn't know that until fairly recently, but it came from an American Friends Service Committee pamphlet. So whenever you say speaking truth to power, you can think of Quaker. And that's become a really important part of our faith, is that radical truth telling, is talking about, how do we come together and lay everything down on the ground, all these different pieces, and come forward with a solution. And that's why Quaker process, it could take us 10 years to paint a playground, but that also means that we can, do really incredible things together. And I think it has to do with that deep listening. It has to do with that radical truth telling. And so I hope there aren't any, there are not many Quakers in Congress, but I hope that, there are more courageous people like AOC that are doing this work. I'm grateful.
Becky, did you have a question? I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I don't have a question exactly, but I do want to say that I agree with Morgan 100%. And thank you for that input. That really gave me another spark of hope, because I think all of us need to hear those kind of thoughts and feelings. But I did want to say that my great-grandparents were Quakers, and that my great-great-grandfather went to Earlham College.
Oh.
And there's a building on your campus named after him. It's Newland. It's not, it's just a building set aside. I think it's for theology or something.
Oh yeah, the Newman Center. Yeah. Or Newland. Is that your
Newland.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's a religion offices.
Yeah, right.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. So I really need to, figure out exactly what went on when my great-great-grandfather was there, but I just never did so. I live near enough to find out. But I wanted to say that I did live in Richmond, Indiana when I was 11 years old. And my friend and I used to go on campus every Saturday, climb a tree and watch the equestrian
Oh,
program.
that's awesome.
And then we decided that we were going to go through the college. So we snuck inside, and we would go in and out of all the classrooms. We were especially interested in the science labs because they had all these specimens, and we thought we were so great because we had, been to a college and all that. So, but the Quakers met on Saturdays there.
Oh, interesting.
So we are Catholics. We weren't supposed to, but we snuck in to the service, and everything was so quiet. And we said, I thought they would quake. They're called Quakers. Why aren't they quaking? Like, they're so quiet. So that was the first thing that we learned about the Quakers, is that they didn't quake or shake or anything. And then and then we were also very taken up with the fact that people would stand up and are they giving testimony? That's what it was. Yeah, they were giving testimony. And of course, because we weren't supposed to be there, it was on my conscience I was in high school and I was still thinking about it, that I had gone to that Quaker meeting, but it really is in my heart. And I've often thought that I would like to go to a Quaker service and participate.
You should come. Well, now's a good time because a lot of Quaker meetings are on Zoom, so very little commitment. You just get to tune in. And I put my email address in the chat box. So if you would like to contact, I actually used to work for the Friends Archives, and so I can definitely connect you. I'm sure that they would have some really interesting information about your grandfather. And I think it would be fun. You can come visit Earlham again, see how it's changed.
Oh, I've been there recently.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
2 years ago.
Becky, you never told me that the whole time I was living in Richmond.
Yeah.
Becky's our chair of the board, by the way. I didn't know you had a building named after you. I would have gone to see it.
Well, yeah.
You're famous and you didn't even tell me.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like to get into that.
But I don't want to boast.
Like a little Quaker famous.
Right.
Casually. Well, definitely come, I'd love to stay in touch and see what we can find about your grandfather. And my email is open to anyone that, feel free to message me. That's my Earlham email address. I also work for Earlham College now. I work in their like semi emissions-y type of work. We do some experimental programming with our majors. It's kind of fun. There's all fun things that happen at Earlham, but feel free to just drop me a note and I'd love to talk more about Quakerism or your faith or ways that we can collaborate. Or finding your lost grandfather's or your grandfather's papers.
Yeah, you didn't know what you were signing up for today.
It'll be fun.
Got all sorts of tasks for you now. Speaking a little bit to what Becky said about her experience going into a friends meeting, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the origin of why silence and contemplative prayer became a core practice in Quakerism. As something I don't think you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I'll connect. It's basically that, oftentimes when people were experiencing church, it was that they were being preached at. And a lot of that had to do, the reason why Quakers were, very heavily against, originally in the beginning, having like a professional clergy is because they viewed that there was a lot of corruption and there was a lot of problems, and that the education system was messed up, and that, there was just like some major issues when it came to that. But, and so they believed that, if we really wanted to hear God, it was by sitting and listening. And that's kind of where the contemplative practice of waiting worship, which is what we call it, So Becky, I'm sure they were so grateful to have you actually in worship. So I don't think you should feel, upset about being part of this. But now, Quakers, like, first off, any Quaker will be like, please come to our meeting. And sometimes I've had the experience of young people finding out about Quakers, being invited by a friend, and then them not saying anything about their worship. And so the one young adult was like, I went to a meeting and I just sat there and no one spoke the whole time. And I was waiting for the meeting to begin. And so it's like, it's definitely something you have to explain before you get there.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting experience. Yes, and so like I said, now some it's not anti-clericalism, definitely. But now it's because they believe that each person has their own connection to God, and that we're all clergy. Like that is our mission, is that we're all clergy. And so that actually is interesting because there is no ordination process even among Quakers that believe in pastors. What you can have is a recognition of your gifts. So many times friends will, they'll be recognized for their gifts of, pastoral care or working with young people or, preaching. And when those are recognized by the yearly meeting is also taking not authority, but kind of some oversight, and I can definitely see, connections to Buddhism and meditation in the ways that Quakers practice. We oftentimes have Quakers that are Buddhists and Buddhists that are Quaker, there's definitely a fluidness. I actually, there's a class at Earlham School of Religion you could take about Quakers encounters with Buddhism, which is about the intersections of Quakerism and Buddhism and how those two religions kind of play off each other on occasion, which is really fun. But yes, definitely invested in listening, which is, very Buddhist, and hearing and being present, which is, is a good thing for your health anyways. So you might as well do it with God. That's how I feel.
We're coming up on the hour. Are there any final questions or comments that anyone had?
Thank you so much for this conversation today. Like I said, feel free to send me an email and keep the thoughts coming. I'm excited.
And Nani, the Oxford Friends, are they still meeting virtually right now? Or?
Oh,
Yeah, we are meeting on Zoom
You are?
every Sunday, pretty much. This past Sunday was a quarterly meeting, so actually we were together with friends from Cincinnati, Lexington, Louisville on a Zoom, and we get more people in a meeting sometimes than when we're just meeting at the Interfaith Center in Oxford.
Well, if anyone is interested in attending a meeting, I'm sure that Nani or Katie can both.
We could connect you with a Zoom link if you would like to join us on a Sunday morning at 10.
Yes, I would love to visit.
I
You're not that far. And one of my professors
That's
goes
right,
to your
we're not
meeting.
that
So
far.
Steve Angel would, I'm sure, be happy to see some of his students at his meeting.
Steve Angel is the one who sets up the link for us.
Oh, I'll have to send him an email.
Yeah, and I'm happy to send that out if you want to pass it to me. Okay, great. So any other final questions or comments before we close? No? Katie, anything, last words you want to?
Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been a lot of fun. And like I said, I look forward to now attending Oxford Friends meeting and to continuing conversations about, your Quaker relatives. It'll be a lot of fun. It sounds to be a lot of fruit from this conversation, and I'm excited to also to go down my rabbit hole about James Terrel today.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everyone for being here with us today. And I hope you'll continue to come to these faith sharings. They're almost every Tuesday, same time, same Zoom link. I think our next one is on the Presbyterian Church. So please join us, and we hope you have a great evening.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.